Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Marcy. And welcome everyone to this seminar on best practices for online learning. I have a ton of information to cover, so I'd like to get right to it. That's okay. So the topics that we are going to cover include preparation for moving on into an online learning space, setting up your workspace, some best practices for your platform use, communicating while you're in this online learning environment, as well as giving your students feedback and some considerations for school administrators. And then we'll talk a little bit about actually delivering some online ready learning experiences. So here we go. Let's start with just a few vocabulary terms so we're all on the same page. And I'm gonna start with course content. So in this situation, your course content is everything that you will provide to your students in the learning environment. So if you were in a classroom, whatever you want your students to use for learning, that's exactly what your course content is. Next is your platform. So this is the space that you use to deliver this course content, and you will use this space consistently. So we've got the learning management system that many of you are probably already familiar with, like the Moodle, Canvas, Haiku, Google Sites, Google Classroom could also be used, and even your school website might be a space that you deliver course content. So it's going to be different for different schools. So let's move on to what I'm calling the learning experience. And it's essentially the learning cycle from start to finish. So any activities, assignments, your lessons, anything that's related to how you package your learning in your classroom, how you deliver your learning in your classroom, how your students interact with it. All of this is the learning experience. I've made some assumptions when I put together this presentation. So I'd like to make sure you understand what those assumptions are so you know sort of where you fall. Um, my first assumption is that your goal here today is to understand how you want to get started quickly in an online learning environment. So I'm assuming you already have a classroom, you're already teaching students, you've already like in mid semester or mid mode at this point, and you want to know how to take your in-person space onto an online space. So that means you already have a lesson plan, you already know what your learning experiences will be. And I'm also assuming that your planned assignments and activities are digital ready. And if they are not yet digital ready, that you will soon convert them into being digital ready. We will probably cover a little bit of what that means later. We'll see. If not, you can always leave a question in the chat. I am also assuming that you already know what platform you will use to deliver your content. And finally, I assume that you already have a clear cycle for how you will interact with your course. Could be, every day you and your students are in the course. Maybe it's twice a week, once a week, whatever your cycle may be. I'm assuming that you have that worked out as well. So with that, let's just get started. And I wanted to start with the technology, the obvious. And the first thing you want to do is make sure that your students have a device and access to internet service. So just had to be said. And with that, it's also helpful for you to know what types of devices your students are using, because you also want to know what tools they have access to. So you want to know what they have installed on their devices, what tools they have access to, and you want to confirm this availability, what they can access, what they have access to, and you want to make sure that they can access the content that you put up on your platform so that they can engage in your learning experience. You also want to know what the school policies may be around student teacher communications. And this could be something that the admins review to make sure that if there are policies that are already written or followed in the school in practice, that they don't interfere with setting up a learning environment in this situation. And just like you do in your own classrooms, have a plan B for any type of unexpected technical difficulties. And well, yeah, you do that in your own classroom, so you know that. Okay, so let's talk about preparing to move into this online space. You want to plan ahead, and I know that this is easier said than done, given that it's possible in the current situation that we're all in independent schools, that it could be tomorrow that we don't have school and we have to move into an online space. So I understand that, but it's ideal, of course, to be able to plan ahead so that you know what you need to implement for your students and that they can access it. Identify what platform you will use. I mentioned that already, but you need to know the platform that you're going to use with your students to deliver all your content, and your students, of course, will need to know this. So you'll also want to identify how you will communicate with your students if you're not going to use your platform. So have that at the ready before you move into your online space. You also want to make sure that these learning experiences that you've created are going to be able to work in the digital space. So take inventory of the tools that you and your students have access to, and make sure that they know how to use them and you know how to use them before you actually implement them in your learning experience. So that the tools don't get in the way. We don't want the technology to get in the way of the learning. When you're designing any of your learning experiences, design them with the student in mind. That's always a best practice for working in an online learning space. Keep them in mind, what they will be doing, how they will perceive the learning, how they will interact with the learning, but design with the student in mind. Okay, so I said this, I'll repeat it. Practice using the platform, how you communicate with your students, and the tools. Practice that as often as you can before it's high stakes for the students and they have to know how to do it. So try to practice. All of this is your preparation period. Now, if you are unable to take a good amount of time to prepare, then I have some suggestions for how to prioritize. That would be selecting the platform, identifying how you're going to communicate with your students, and then confirming the technology so that everybody is able to access the learning. I also have a little suggestion, a quick suggestion of like a little worksheet that you might consider putting together, listing all of the tools that you and your students use frequently, as well as tools that you and your students have access to in your school environment, and then all of the tasks that you need to perform, and just sort of matching them up on this worksheet. And you could take the switch view by listing all of the tasks that you have to complete with your students, and then associating the tasks with any tools that are available. And this could help you sort of lay the land for yourself as you are developing your learning experiences in the online space. So let's talk about some platform use best practices. You've got what you will definitely do with your platform, and then some potential uses for your platform. Definitely deliver all of your course content on your platform. You want to keep your students in that same space so that they know the consistency of where to go and where to find things and how to interact with the platform. Because of course, the more they use it, the more familiar they are with it, and then the easier it becomes for them. If the whole school can use the same platform, that would be the best practice. But certainly you have control inside of your own classroom. So you'll want to make sure that you in your classroom are using the same platform to deliver your content. And when I say whole school, I mean probably division level, because you may have a school where the lower school uses a certain type of platform and your upper school uses a different, that's fine. You just want the student, remember we're designing for the student in mind, we just want the student to have an easier experience with interacting with the online learning space. So some potential uses for your platform: you can exchange actual work on the platform, you can give students feedback. Actually, some platforms enable you to deliver your assessments there. Some platforms let you communicate with students. You'll also have some platforms that can provide spaces for student collaboration. And then some platforms also enable you to track grades. So those are some of the things that you can do right on your platform. And if your platform enables that, I recommend that you take advantage of that so that you are consistent with your delivery. So keep them in one place. That is the best practice. So how do we set up this platform? Let's talk about setting up your platform in your workspace. First, communicate clear expectations for the students and put those expectations right on your platform so that they're always available for the students. Provide a space on your platform for students to communicate and interact with one another. You want to give them that ability to develop a sense of community and engagement in your platform. So giving them that space helps. Um, of course, your platform is going to be where you put all of your course content and your learning experiences. Use the platform for that. Any links that you want to provide your students that are not on the platform, then you want to put them there. So all of your learning content, these links are included in the course content. As you are setting up your workspace, make sure you organize the content in a logical way for your students. Make it consistent. So if you have a cycle of daily interaction with your students, then you may consider organizing your content by day. Like Wednesday, and this is the content for Wednesday, Tuesday, content for Tuesday. But you want to be consistent. Don't do Wednesday, Tuesday, and then you say next week. So be consistent with how you organize your content for the student's sake. If this content is a new space for your students, if they're not already used to interacting with your class online, then this will be new for them and they'll need to understand how to navigate your space. So you'll want to provide an overview for your students to be able to refer to how they are to progress through the elements that you've provided for them on the course. So provide that overview of your content. And then you want to communicate to the students how they are to get help. And this is help with the course content. They may have a question about something that you want them to do. Or they may be having technical difficulties and need to reach out to someone with technical expertise. So you want to provide that on your platform so that when students encounter such questions, they know where to go and how to get their answers. So as we're talking about getting help and communication, let's talk a little bit about best practices for communication in an online learning environment. So we've got the teacher to student communication. And I talked before about deciding on a method, and you'll need to consider one-to-one communications and one-to-many communications. This can depend on your platform, but it doesn't necessarily have to depend on your platform because, as I mentioned, some platforms enable communications, some don't. So regardless of that, you want to select a method of communication for both real-time communication as well as messaging communication. And when I say messaging, of course, this is asynchronous type communication, email, discussion boards, posts on outside tools. So you want both types of communication set up. So here's some examples of methods of communication. You can put a discussion board if your platform enables that, where students can communicate and you can communicate to students one-to-many. Replies on posts to other tools. This is usually one-to-many as well because it's usually public. You can do chat with the student, and that may be chat on a cell phone if your school allows that, or a chat room that you can set up. There's, of course, video conferencing. And don't forget conference calls. So you have the ability to have conferencing without the video if you prefer. There are free sites out there where you can get free numbers for conference calls. Then there's email. Conference calls and emails aren't really digital native or built into like your online learning environment. But if you don't have access to any of the other tools, then certainly implement these. And then of course, there's the good old-fashioned telephone. If all else fails, technology doesn't work, or you don't have access to these tools, you can pick up a phone with your students, again, provided your school doesn't have any policies against that. Regardless of your way of communication, you want to be consistent with it. Consistency is great for students, as you know already in your expertise. Okay, so we've talked about method. Let's talk about frequency. So you want to communicate your goals, expectations, and instructions at the beginning of every cycle. We talked about if you have a daily cycle, weekly cycle, 2 days a week. Each of these cycles is going to be brand new information. So it's just like if you're at the beginning of the lesson in your classroom and you're explaining to students what they are to expect, what's to come. It's the same thing. So you just want to make sure you put it in writing for the students, or put it in video, or put it in images, using multiple modes of learning as well. But communicate these goals, expectations at the beginning of the cycle. You will also want to provide feedback on completed work frequently. So you may not, the reason why I'm sort of highlighting this as opposed to how you may do it in the classroom is that you want to sort of find ways to insert feedback at different stages during their learning instead of perhaps waiting until they've completed their learning. It's better for engagement in the online space since you don't have that real-time communication with your students. This feedback is very helpful. You might want to insert a check-in in the middle of your cycle. And if there's work that's due and you need to make changes to that work or changes to an expectation that you expect the students to execute the next day, then set a time for yourself and the students after which you will not make any changes. So maybe 5 o'clock. I just picked 5 o'clock. You won't make any changes for the students for the next day. So that will be helpful to everyone. But regardless, be consistent. If you're going to do a check-in mid-cycle, keep up with that check-in. If you're going to check in via phone, check in mid-cycle via phone. So you want to be consistent so the students know what to expect. Okay, also on your platform, provide space and time to ask questions. While students are interacting with your course content, they will have questions, as you know. So you want to let the students know how you will let them ask those questions in the middle of the night or outside of structured time. So it could be 10 o'clock. They're working on something, they have a question. How do you want them to ask you that question? Or do you allow them just to send you an email? Or perhaps you have a discussion board on your platform that they can post the questions, but they need a space just for questions that they come up with, let's say in the middle of the night, or questions that would be relevant for the whole classroom. So you may consider sort of a one-to-many space of asking questions. So I just said that. Any one-to-one or personal communications, of course, you would manage via email, but consider those public spaces for asking questions so that the entire class can benefit from them. Again, just be consistent with your selections. Okay, so office hours. This is important to set up this time and space for students for real-time communication. Of course, you understand why you may need office hours. Students may need some clarifications on some questions, or you may want to check in on a student. So that may lead you to think about when to have these office hours. So you could have, I would suggest you do both open hours and also by appointment so that you can have control over that schedule, but then also tell students that you're available at this time, you know, on whatever days that is. And so that leads you to think about, is it this a one-to-one or one-to-many type office hours situation? And of course, you could set up for both one-to-one and one-to-many. But you'll want to figure out what that looks like for you and communicate that to your students so that they know when they will have these opportunities for real-time communication. And think about the methods that we talked about on a previous slide in terms of methods of communication. You can implement any of those methods for your office hours as well. Again, be consistent. If you have Monday office hours, have Monday office hours. Okay, so every cycle, you'll want to provide clear instructions to the students about what they are going to do. You want to provide the learning goals, set their expectations. So set them up for what's to come, just like we talked about how you do it in the beginning of, at the beginning of a lesson in your own classroom. You'll communicate this on your platform along with the learning experience that you end up hosting. Also, remember, if they're using a tool, you'll need to give them instructions on how to use that tool. So it's more than just about, oh, this is what you do to learn, but this is how you're going to use the tool in order to interact with this learning. So specific instructions for the tools should go up there as well. And whatever you do, make sure it's in multiple modes. So video and a transcript, some written text, maybe text with some images included, an audio file to go along with some text that you wrote up for the instructions. So offer multiple modes of communicating this information to your students on your platform, so it'll hit the different types of learners that we have. And don't forget to remind students of how to get help. At the end of your expectations, for the week or for the day, just include a line at the end that says, remember, if you have any questions, tell them how to contact you if they have any questions. So include that in your cyclical expectations communique. And finally, be consistent. So whatever you choose to do it every time so the students know what to expect. Okay, feedback on these learning activities. Perhaps your platform has a way that you can provide feedback. Maybe you want to use one-to-one methods to provide feedback to your students. Maybe the learning tool that they're using enables feedback. So students don't have those in-person cues to assist with communication, and there's not that opportunity for that quick aside when you see a student at the end of the class to check in with them, or for the student to ask you quickly in between classes a question. So you want to make sure you give them feedback frequently and in a consistent manner. Okay, so past teacher to student communication, we also have student to student communication. Giving them a space to work together and communicate is also important in an online learning environment. It builds community for the students, it fosters engagement for them as well, and it also can enhance their learning and their understanding when they can learn from one another. The way you can do this, you can assign projects or other collaboration activities for their learning experiences. This may depend on your platform capabilities, but there are outside external tools that you could also use to enable student and student communication. So some examples we've mentioned before in this presentation: discussion boards, chat rooms, video conferencing, the same things that you can use with the students. I do suggest that if any of these other public methods are not available to you and your students, that if you're having them communicate with one another via email, you ask them to CC you on the communication so that you stay a part of the class. They know that you're a part of the class, or a part of sort of that communication, and you can sort of help to continue guide their learning if you're included on those communications. So, online class sessions. We're in an online learning space, so it would be great and beneficial to actually have real-time class sessions. Determine how frequently you will have these. Maybe it's once a cycle. And then how will you have these online sessions? You can go back to that slide where we talked about communication methods. Those are the same methods that you can use to hold your real-time class sessions in an online space. Whatever you choose, you should learn the technology, as well as your students need to practice the technology before it's high stakes. So however you're able to do that, maybe in these next few days, if you can practice some online class sessions with your students or practice the technology, that would be great. I know it's easier said than done, but the best practice is to really hold some of these online class sessions. Here's some examples of some tools that you can use. Video conferencing, where you share your screen, which is what we're doing right now. And then again, I'll go back to the conference call because that's sometimes forgotten in online learning, but you can always use a conference call with some collaborative documents, and you can just hold class like that as well. Okay, so let's talk about some best practices for providing feedback to your students. I've talked about this and I'm just reiterating a lot of it. Feedback is essential for your students. In a space where you don't have the opportunity for that quick chat, you'll need to be intentional about providing feedback, since that in-person communication is missing. The more feedback you provide, the richer the learning experience will be for the student. Consider how you will communicate grades to students. You'll have the per assignment grade, giving them feedback in that way, but then depending on how long we're out, there could be an accumulation of grades, and you'll have to decide how you want to convey those cumulative grades with your students. Rubrics can be very useful in online learning because many times our assessing is different in an online learning space. So using rubrics to assess students' learning can be helpful. Providing a rubric before the learning can help the student know what they are going to learn and how you would like to, how you're going to assess that learning. Providing the rubric after gives them details into how they were assessed. So rubrics can be very helpful. Of course, if you have a platform that enables feedback, that's the best practice to use that. If it's off platform and that's what you decide to do, then you'll have to decide what that means. Is it going to be through email that you deliver their feedback, a collaborative document that you use? So you'll need to figure out how you want to deliver feedback and be consistent with your feedback. So how to assess students in this online learning space. Many platforms enable assessing. So you can build a quiz right on your platform, so that's convenient. But there are also online tools out there available to you to use for assessment. And you can easily find some of those tools that you can use. We use DigiExam here to deliver online assessments. There are many tools out there. You could also think of alternative ways of delivering assessments to students, or to ask them to demonstrate their learning. So instead of your standard quiz, maybe you have them do a project or a podcast. So there are other ways that you can have your students demonstrate their learning that don't entail just the printing of something. But if you have to print and scan, you can always do that too. So you can provide a PDF, students print it, fill it out, scan it back, and give it give it back to you however you decide they're going to deliver their work to you. Okay, so some considerations for administrators. You'll want to review any policies to see if there are any in place that may interfere with how teachers and students work in an online environment. So do you have policies regarding cell phone use or restrictions on times of the day that is permitted for teachers and students to communicate? You may need to adjust some of these for the period that you're in online learning. So just a consideration. It's great for administrators to articulate and communicate the school's expectations of what the teachers are supposed to be doing while in this online learning space and what the students are to be doing in this online learning space. And so this could be, this should be in writing. You could also have meetings. You know, we all need to be reminded of situations like this, what to do. So definitely determine what those expectations are and then communicate them. If this is something new to teachers, perhaps administrators can meet with teachers individually and look at their plan, help them develop the plan for what they're going to do while they're in this online space, maybe temporarily. And so you can answer any questions, allay any fears by just having some one-on-one time, administrator and teacher, to go through what this is going to look like. Also, I would consider designating a day of practice. So this could be a day where everybody comes to school, but instead of having classes, teacher and and students in the same classroom, all of the classes are being held online. So this is a little lower stakes because everyone is still there. They're there to get support. They can ask questions, and you also get a chance to practice a lot of what it would look like if you were actually not in school and learning online. So I would consider having a day of practice. Okay, so we can move into these online ready learning experiences. So I'm going to start with the online the learning experience cycle or workflow. So first, students learn something, and then they respond to that learning. So you may have them reading some content and then have them respond to that content in some way. It could be a test, it could be an essay, it could just be a multiple choice set of questions. After they respond, teachers give feedback, and then students learn from that feedback, and the cycle starts over again, either responding to the learning again, or maybe they come off of this topic onto another topic, but then start the same cycle. So using that cycle, you want to provide activities and assignments that include and require input and participation from the students. So just considering the best practices for the learning experiences that you'll have in the online space, you want them to be engaging to the students and have them participating in them and providing input while they are learning. We just talked about consider if you will have classes in real time. And for your online learning experiences, you may want to include some student-to-student collaboration. So just thinking about some of the best practices for learning in an online space, these are some things to consider. You can also have learning experiences where the teachers and the students are collaborating. So this could be a collaborative document where a student is working on an essay and a teacher has access to that document and is offering feedback while the student is developing their ideas or developing their essay. So students and teachers can also collaborate during this time. Again, you want to provide feedback regularly, not just once a student is complete with an assignment or maybe a milestone in their learning, but you may have to be intentional or find other ways to offer feedback while the student is in the learning process of your experience. Use multimedia when you are conveying information from teacher to student, especially in your instructions. So again, video, audio, along with text, images. So however you can enrich the communication and the understanding for the student, that will benefit the students greatly. Okay, so let's also consider making sure that the activities and assignments are compatible with your student devices. And you want to make sure that the technology tools that you want them to use with the learning experiences are available. Okay, so practice using any tools and accessibility of that content before you use it with the student. So we said that earlier, when it's low stakes, have them use that tool that you expect them to use when you're actually assessing their learning. So practice beforehand is great. Make sure make sure your learning experiences are digital ready. If you're not building learning experiences on your platform, then you're pulling them from somewhere else. So you'll need to make sure that they work in a digital space. If your students in your school use assistive technologies, you'll need to know that, and you'll want to design your learning experiences to accommodate that. So some examples of assistive technologies would be screen readers. Maybe you might have to find videos that have captioning already if students need that. So you probably already know this about your students if they need that, but this is just a reminder that your learning experiences should also follow along with that if your students require assistive technologies. And a benefit of online learning experiences is that you have the opportunity to consider differentiating learning. You can provide ways for students to go back and relearn something and be reassessed while enabling students who get the material, get the content to move on. And if you provide learning experiences that have these different layers or different levels, then you can actually differentiate the learning while you're in this online space. So that's a nice benefit. Okay, I have some examples. So here's an example of a learning experience. Let's call it a book discussion. So the way you might set this up: post to your platform the assignment of pages of a book to read, and then create a discussion board where you have one or more questions that you want your students to answer regarding what they read. Then you require students to answer each question and respond to the answers of 3 or more students. It depends on how many students you may have in the class, how many responses that you may require. And then use your discretion as to when you will chime in. Just like you would in your own classroom, you may just sit back, fall back, and let the students have the discussion about a topic, or you may chime in. Same thing on the discussion board. And then provide students feedback on their participation according to the expectations you set. Because remember, earlier in the presentation, we talked about making sure you set clear expectations of what the students are going to do in that learning experience. So they know how they are, let's just say, being graded on this discussion board experience. And you may be surprised at how engaged students get with these discussion boards. It actually always amazes me when I read some of these discussion boards, how into it they are, especially both middle school and high school students. So reminders on this type of learning experience: provide the clear instructions, I just said that, and clear expectations of how they're going to participate. So you want to put that in writing. Post once, reply 3 times. Communicate how they will be assessed. 5 points for your original post, 1 point for each response, something like that. Also, let me include, outside of just the points, you might also want to make sure that the posts are substantive. So whatever that means to you in that experience or in that learning, you may want to make sure that the students include certain elements in their post. And if the students don't already know how to use the discussion board tool, include instructions. And remember to practice beforehand. And as always, remind the students how to get help at every moment. I will also say that this learning experience could be a real-time discussion. So we talked about having online classes. You can actually do this discussion in your online real-time class. Okay, so let's look at another example of a learning experience. I call this research with an audio response. So your learning goal could be for students to understand the causes of the secession of the South from the United States prior to the Civil War. Some resources may be, and this would be the learn part of the cycle, they watch videos, they read articles, maybe there's something in a textbook, maybe they have a textbook. Maybe you can do a real-time class lecture and give them some information, but you just give them all of this opportunity to learn. And then what you do is you can create like this intermittent sort of feedback, create a collaboration document where the student starts to put their ideas. And they share this document with you, and you can follow along with their thinking and where they're headed. You can guide their learning. You can chat with the student on this document and sort of help them to develop their ideas so that they get to this final product, which would be them creating a podcast describing 4 basic reasons for the South seceding from the Union. And that's where they end up, where they land. And some reminders, if this is something that interests you, again, communicate the learning path to students clearly and in great detail. So those are those expectations and instructions that you set up front. Use the multiple modes for communicating this information. I'm sorry, I didn't have that bullet up. Okay. So also provide instructions for using this audio recording tool and the collaborative document, and enable them to practice. So let me also say that we talk about practicing beforehand, but students of course forget. So that's why including the instructions in these learning experiences as a reminder to them is still important, because they forget how to use it. Use the document to provide students progress on their document. So you create this collaborative document for them to record ideas. Use the document to collaborate with them and help them develop their learning. And then you can provide a rubric for the grading of this podcast, because podcasts can be sort of subjective, but a rubric really helps to quantify some of that learning and quantify how you are actually measuring that learning. And then a nice element is you could let the students share their podcast with other students in the class. This could also offer different topics that all relate to the Civil War, and then you end up with this really rich information about the Civil War for the entire class to enjoy. Okay, one more example. Math. You can have a learning experience where students learn a new math concept. So you can start by creating a screen recording of you explaining a math concept, or you can curate one from the internet. And students will watch the screen recording, then have a real-time problem solving session. So do something like this, where you have all your students come at the same time, and then you're demonstrating how to solve these problems, where students can ask questions. You can have students actually solving some problems and sort of share their screens. So schedule a real-time session where you guys can solve problems together. Then you can assign a set of problems for independent practice and mastery. Maybe this is through an online tool. I don't know if you've heard of MathSpace. So that's a place where they have the ability to solve problems online. Maybe it's a PDF worksheet. So you create a PDF of just a worksheet, post it on your platform. The students either fill out the PDF directly on their computers online, or they download it, print it, fill it out, scan it, post it back to the platform. So you can do just a PDF worksheet for the set of problems. Grade the problems and either assign more problems for the students that need more practice, or move on to the next concept. So this is that opportunity for differentiating the learning and letting students work at their pace. Also important, remind students of your office hours for one-to-one help. So let them make an appointment with you to get some one-on-one time to ask some questions about the math. Same reminders, clear instructions, detailed instructions, help them understand what they're about to embark upon in this learning experience. Use those multiple modes. Practice using the tools with the students ahead of time, if you have that time, and then remind them how to get help outside of that real-time class session. Okay, so I think that was a ton of information. Maybe it wasn't. But what I decided to do is sort of give you like a quick start guide. Like, and this sort of serves as a summary as well. So if there's one slide that you print and you sort of have at the side of your desk, perhaps this is the one. So here is my summary of the presentation. Best practices for online learning. Use a single platform for students to access all course content. One place to put everything. Use multiple modes when conveying any information. Video and text, audio and text, text and images, so on. Set up office hours. Students need that time. Always communicate clear expectations and instructions to your students. Practice using a tool before it counts. Even if you moved into the online space and you haven't had an opportunity to practice tools, you can still create a time to practice those tools with your student before it matters for them. Schedule real-time interactions. That's you and the students in real time, students and students in real time, but give opportunities and space for real time. Make sure students know how to get help. And remember, that's help on your content as well as help with technology issues that they may encounter. Create interactive learning experiences. So not just read something, write something, read something, write something, find a way for this to be interactive. Provide feedback regularly. And ensure the school policies, practices, and expectations are in line with working in an online learning environment. And you guys can probably guess what my last point is, but I'm going to say it anyway, and that's be consistent. So you want to make sure you're consistent in how you're delivering your content and how you're interacting with your students and how you package this all. So that concludes my part.
Liz, thank you so much. I've got questions. I've been keeping an eye on the chat and have chosen a couple of questions that you might have time to answer, although we're very short on time because it was a rich presentation. Back at the beginning, you mentioned an inventory of tools. We're wondering if you can supply us with that inventory of tools and I can share it with the group when I send the slides and the recording, or if that is something you can drop into the chat box and people can access here and now.
So the inventory of tools is for you to create. On that slide, which will be handed out with the slide deck that Marcy delivers to everyone, is just a sample. It's just a white piece of paper, had tools on one side, tasks on the other, and then you just write down all of the tools that you and your students are able to have access to. So for instance, in my environment, some of the tools that I might say would be G Suite, Moodle, Nearpod, DigiExam, and MathSpace. So those are the tools that I know my students know how to use. I know I have access to them, they do. And then from there, I would say, well, I want to, going back to that math situation, I want to assign some math problems for my students. What tools do I have access to? And then I would match up that exercise with the tool. So that's what I mean by inventory. I don't have a pre-done inventory because it's really going to depend on what tools you have in your own environment. I hope that answers the question.
It does. The other another question, Liz, is could you speak to modes for student collaboration online?
Sure, yes. So some modes for student collaboration online would be, if you're talking real time, it definitely could be a Google Hangout Meet. It could be a Zoom meeting. If you're doing chat room could work as well.
What about small groups and pairs, Liz?
Small groups and pairs, you could do the same things, could be small groups and pairs, because you don't have to have one hangout for the whole class. You can definitely break off. But you've got discussion boards and you can group people in discussion boards. The collaborative documents are another way that students can collaborate. So those are some off the top of my head.
Thanks. And can you speak very briefly to this platform called DigiExam?
Oh, sure. DigiExam is not a free tool. DigiExam is a paid tool which enables online assessment. And for us in our environment, it's helpful. We're a one-to-one environment. And so we want students to use their own exams when it comes to if they have accommodations where they needed a computer. It got complicated in terms of loaning computers or, students couldn't interact with something. So we ended up getting a platform where we could build the exam natively inside the platform, and we deliver it inside the platform, which is DigiExam. And it locks down the student's computer because we were concerned about they have their own device. So it keeps them inside of this tool to take the exam, and then it's all digital.